Hotep, it's Brother Beniti Amun-Re, back for another post, class, sit down, whatever you want to call it. What I want to talk about today are obviously the various different things going on in the world right now. All over the news, the effect it has on our planet, on consciousness, how religious ignorance ties into this whole scenario. And I want to also recap on one of the last few posts back I did on the CERN project, which these European scientists had created these huge hydrogen colliders, and were trying to recreate the Big Bang Theory. We discussed about them opening portholes and dimensions in doing this, and the effect it could have on the planet, the effect it could have on spiritual consciousness. Now, whether you were aware of it or not, just a couple of days ago, there were multiple effects felt by that CERN project. I had a host of people on that day were having all types of issues with their cell phones, communication, anything that dealt with electronics or communications was affected. There was a lot of strange things going on that day if you were paying attention. Also, it affected the magnetic poles of our planet. Now, we know back in 2012, December 21st, 2012, the magnetic poles shifted. And as I've talked about before on previous posts, that was the signaling in of a new era of consciousness. Now, leading up to 2012, when you go back to 2010, 2011, when a lot of people started really heavily talking about 2012, not really understanding it, especially those that were focusing on the cataclysmic, doomsday, apocalyptic aspects of it. And I've always said this: once they start making movies about something, and if you guys remember, shortly when that phenomenon was going on a couple years ago, they came out with a movie called 2012, and of course they made it very Hollywood, and made it very super exaggerated, for lack of a better word. That's when there's more to the situation. But if you understood the Mayan calendar, if you understood the prophecies of what that was talking about, it wasn't talking about a physical cataclysmic or a doomsday event. So, there was a mistake in that, and that's part of deception and misleading us spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. We have this going on. We have one area and one aspect where people are trying to understand creation, which leads me into my next point. These same people that are doing these things behind closed doors are fronting or pretending like they're your mainstream Christians. You have a lot of these religious fanatics, be they Christians, Muslims, or Jews, and I'm going to call it for what it is, and if you get offended by it, sorry, but it's the truth. This is the number one reason in our world today why we have war, death, destruction, violence, killing, is all because of religious fanaticism. Now, when we look at the three, we're going to focus on the three monotheistic religions for a few minutes here. And those three main monotheistic religions that are prominent world over are Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And out of those three religions, okay, you have multiple different sects that vary from those religions. Let's briefly run through it. When you talk about Islam, you have the Sunni sect, you have the Shiite sects, you have the Wahhabis, you have the Ahmadiyas, and out of those branch subsects, and out of those subsects branch more subsects, and they all have a variance of opinion on the Sunnah and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and Islam as a way of life, and they have variances of who's the correct Khalifa or successor, etc. All these different variations of it, all claiming to worship the same God, Allah, but yet they can't come to a common understanding of what's the right way. And that's just in Islam alone. In Judaism, you have the Ashkenazim, you have the Sephardim, you have different so-called sects of Judaism amongst the Europeans or the Caucasians. Then you have, amongst the black Hebrew Israelites, multiple different camps and houses and sects. and they all claim to be worshiping the same God, but yet they can't get along, and they break into subsects, and the list goes on and on and on. And then you have Christianity, which we could be here all day talking about the many different sects of Christianity that exist in the world today that have branched out from Catholicism, be it Seventh-day Adventist, Pentecostal, Jehovah's Witness, etc. Again, all claiming to follow the same prophet Jesus, but yet can't come to an agreement as a whole of, what is the so-called correct way. Now, this is all done intentionally for a reason. Okay? Now, if you go back to a post when I was talking about the extraterrestrial beings called the Anunnakis that came to this planet, okay, and scavenged this planet for gold, and we went over the whole thing with the monatomic gold, etc. These beings were also the ones responsible for creating all these different sects of religion that people are administering to and adhering today. All these laws, rules, regulations, and restrictions were created by these beings to keep you dumb, to keep you completely ignorant of the truth of what's really going on in your existence, in creation, and how it ties into you as a human being on this planet. Okay? Now, when we filter that down to today, we have a disease that's running rampant in the world today called ignorance. Now we have amongst us today, in all these three monotheistic religions, we have people fighting, debating, and arguing over a bunch of dead people that they can't even prove existed. Now, when we get down to the essence of it, when you go through your Bible, you will find out that they are plagiarized stories of Sumerian and Egyptian deities. Bottom line is this, and do the research. And again, first and foremost, not to give your opinion, but present your facts and your information. And what I simply mean by that is this, okay? When you go through the Bible, okay, the average individual cannot even prove to you that any of these biblical characters exist. Let me give you an example. Okay. Prove that there was an Adam. Prove that there was a Moses. They still have not even proven the Ark of the Covenant in the Noah story. They have not even verified an historical Jesus when you bring it up to the New Testament. You will find out that most of these stories are plagiarized from the Egyptian mysteries. You'll find out that the character they call Moses in the Bible is identical to a story of Thutmose I of ancient Egypt. Now pay attention to the phonetics of the name. Thutmose and Moshe, or Mose, which means being drawn from water, okay, is the same exact story when you read in the Egyptian mysteries of Pharaoh Thutmose, who drove out a group of people who invaded Egypt called the Hyksos, or the Hekakasut, the shepherd kings. These were your Greek invaders that came into Egypt and mixed in with the ancient Nubian Egyptians who were black or African, creating what we see today in Egypt, a mixed group of Hyksos. And the last 18 dynasties you learn about in ancient Egypt are what we refer to as the Hyksos. Okay? Now, there is no such word as Egypt. Let's establish this first. This comes in later translations. The word Egypt comes from the Greek word Egyptos. Okay? And the word Egyptos simply means burnt, or land of burnt faces. They called the invaders, the Greek invaders that came into Egypt, they called them Egyptos because the sun burnt their faces. So when we're referring to Egypt and the Egyptians, that would only be acknowledged in the last 18 dynasties. Now, we know when you go back and break down the essence of it, the pre-dynastic Egyptians, which were prior to the Hyksos dynasties, they didn't refer to the land as Egypt. They referred to it as Tah-ma-re, or Tamare, earth, water, sun. It was one of the many sacred names, and I tell people the same thing when you study the Egyptian mysteries. Even when you use the term Kemet, you are limiting yourself, and you are limiting that knowledge and time frame, and you're still tying it into biblical information, because the word Kemet comes from the Hebrew word Ham, which is the same name of the so-called prophet Ham mentioned in your biblical stories in Genesis. and therefore still tying you into Bible or biblical stories. So Hem or Hem just means, well, it means land of the blacks, but in Hebrew. And we know the ancient Egyptians didn't speak Hebrew language. When you go back to the hieroglyphics, it's a whole different spoken language when translated from the glyphs. So the point being is, these biblical stories cannot be confirmed. So we have people arguing, debating, fussing over whose religion is right. And then this ignorance becomes so fanatical world over that if you look at all the conflicts that have taken place all over the world, whether there's an agenda for it or not, but religion has its root in most of these conflicts. Obviously, we see what's going on in Syria, we see what's going on in Iraq, we see what's going on in the Middle East with fanatical groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who feel through their interpretation of fanaticism that they can strong arm people into their beliefs to the so-called point, to the level of sickness that they will kill and behead and use these barbaric measures to get their point across. Religion is at the root of those. You look in all parts of Africa that are being ravaged with civil war, you have this idiocy of Islamic fanaticism now working and poisoning its way into Africa, and right here in America. You also have it here in America, and all claim to be following a peaceful, loving God called Allah. Okay? Then you have your fanatical Christians who you have millions of these sects all throughout the United States. You have storefront churches in certain neighborhoods on every corner you go. It's just mass chaos and confusion, and my point being is there's going to be a long line in heaven, you know, because which religions does God want you to follow? They all claim they're right. They all can't be right. Let's establish that. You're either right or you're wrong. Let me say that again. You're either right or you're wrong. So only one of them can be right. The question is, who is? Okay? Everybody has their own interpretation of it, which now leads me to my next point. Having said that, and I can talk about this pretty much all day and all night, I just wanted to give you a brief summarization. This is the problem that is plaguing us, that's keeping us ignorant and causing sickness amongst us mentally and spiritually. Now, until we completely leave that ignorance alone, and that ignorance I'm referring to is religion, which deals with faith and belief, we will never evolve. Because here's the problem. The planet will never change, first and foremost. Everything in root, or its origin, or the essence or origin of a problem starts first spiritually. The powers that be, whether you want to call them the Draconians, whether you want to call them the Illuminati, the powers that be know, if they can keep influencing us mentally with these subliminal doctrines of religion, and keep doing things in the media to control our emotions, to try to incite race wars. And as you see now, and I spoke upon this in one of the last classes that I just did, you see now they keep seems like every couple of months since the Trayvon Martin case, they keep inciting these racial incidences, which I find very intriguing. That they keep planting this stuff in the news to control your emotions. And like I said, we're dealing now with a form of mental slavery. And mental slavery is more powerful than physical slavery, because if I can control your mind, then I can pretty much get you to bed and do anything I want. And I can control your emotions, which means I can manipulate you to do whatever I want physically. And this is the problem, and this is what's going on this planet that we live on right now. So we're never ever going to make that leap in our spiritual evolution if we keep staying controlled by this religious dogma. Now, yes, these draconian forces, the Illuminati, that have these connections with these extraterrestrial beings are the ones for influencing this energy. That's a fact. Whether you have raised yourself up to the realization of that or not, that's on you. You have to do the research. You have to do the study. Now, one thing that I find amongst people that study. And this is another thing. There's a mentality we have to shake. You have to put in the work to come to the realization of these things. Now, some stuff that I might say might sound far-fetched, that you say, man, that sounds a little bit out there. It might be out there to you because you're just not familiar with it, or you just haven't raised yourself up to the realization of it. Most people stuck in faith and belief, and remember, faith and belief are trust in things not proven or confirmed. Let me say that again. Faith and belief are trust in things that have not been proven or confirmed. Now, if you choose to want to live your life that way, that's on you, but don't get upset when somebody confronts you with a viewpoint and is requiring for you to present yourselves the facts on your situation. Like, for an example, if you went to a religious person and asked them to prove to you God existed without using their Bible or their Quran, they wouldn't be able to do it. Therefore confirming that most of these religious people have been programmed with man-made ideas and man-made concepts that were created and passed down through time. And the Bible translators, as they've made various different translations of these Bibles and Qurans, adjusted things as need be to suit certain points that they were trying to get across. But when we go back to the essence of it, okay, we have to look at it from a metaphysical aspect. I want to refer you to a book right now. I want you to look this book up. And actually, we are actually going to be having this brother on our radio show that we do on TalkShoe.com called Awakening Universal Minds. And if you're watching this post and you're able to tune in, you can tune in to this upcoming on Thursday, March 26th. We're going to have this brother on that wrote this book called Dark Light Consciousness, Melanin, Serpent Power, and the Matrix. It's a really thorough book that gets into a deep level of metaphysics. And again, he'll be on our show Thursday, March 26th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can go to TalkShoe.com. Just type in Awakening Universal Minds. The show will come up. Or you can even hit me up at khnum19@gmail.com, and I can send you the link. This upcoming Thursday, March 19th, we're going to have Dr. Phil Valentine on the show, talking about a wide range of topics. Now, you can also go to my Google page, Mother Nubia Incorporated's Google page, and all the radio shows that we do are archived. There's links. You can listen to all the radio shows also on the Google page, Mother Nubia Incorporated. All right, having said that, I want to go back to this book. I'm going to go to the very beginning. I want to start with the introduction. And I'm going to go through a couple of key points because these two paragraphs speak volumes. So I'm going to read an excerpt from Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum's book, Dark Light Consciousness, Melanin, Serpent Power, and the Matrix. And this is coming from the introduction called Genesis, Dark Matters, and the Legacy of the Stars. So I'm going to go ahead and read this first page. It says, religion and science are the two conjugated faces or phases of one and the same complete act of knowledge. The only one which can embrace the past and the future of evolution so as to contemplate, measure, and fulfill them. These are the dark ages. Everywhere we look, the man of reason lives in doubt. Doubt about faith, doubt about God, doubt about any meaning in life, doubt of even the living radiance that sustains life and existence, from the microscopic amoeba with its minuscule gyrations in a drop of water to the spiral of galaxies 1,000 light years beyond our present sight. Meanwhile, many men of faith in an age of chaos have descended into the darkness of religious fanaticism, as we just talked about, removing them from the awareness of this spiritual consciousness. Okay? Violence, dogma, and the teeth of intolerance are turned against any who disagree with his narrow conception of God. And how often does that go on today? When you get into a conversation what I like to term somebody who's a religious fanatic. As soon as you disagree with their narrow conception of God, they want to argue with you. Some even want to take it to a physical level because you're striking a nerve, and it's just something that they're not ready to deal with based on their misperception of reality. Now, I've found out, excuse me, apologize for that. I've found out that once you get into a conversation with somebody who is religious, once you start dealing with metaphysics and science and facts and mathematics, they can't sustain the conversation. And I'm bringing this up to show you the point. When you deal with faith and belief and those levels of ignorance, it's hard to get an individual who's engulfed in that faith and belief system to come up out of that and look at it from a factual perspective. And that's what this is talking about. And this goes on every day. And this is the problem with the world today. This is why people can't sit down. This is why people can't get along. And this is why things can't get accomplished as a universal whole. Because, again, if we're not on the same page mentally, we can never, ever, ever, ever come together physically. All right? So then it goes on to say, surely science, beauty, and our moral genius can open a gateway out of this morass. The awakened eye of evolution suggests a path on which together faith and reason can find a way. Now, reasoning is the key. Because if we all sat down and reasoned the reality of things out, we'd get to the essence of the truth. Our species is on the verge of exploring the cosmos in ways we have only dreamed of before. We wrap ourselves in ships of metal and harness the forces of Earth for a vaster trip to the stars. Our science has become more integrated, more expansive, and more sublime. So must our spiritual sciences. As we explore the heavens of our forebears who watched from these shores in splendor and amazement, every year the eyes of our telescopes reveal planets orbiting distant stars, planets remarkably similar to our own Earth. It seems only a matter of time before we officially recognize intelligent life on other systems. And brings me to my next point of what we call extraterrestrials, or life forms on other planets and galaxies. Now let's just use common sense. Okay? If we use simple common sense, we see. Let's use the planet Mars, for example. Over the last 20, 30 years, there's been multiple reports on scientists discovering water on Mars, scientists discovering alien life form, which ties into this life on Mars, face on Mars. Different reports have come out over the years suggesting evidence that there was life on Mars. Now we know, going back to this story of these extraterrestrials called the Anunnakis coming here, we know they set up a base or a laboratory in Mars where they stored the gold and took it back to their home planet. That's getting into another story. We know that the extraterrestrial life form has inhabited Mars. Now we also know it's a scientific fact, wherever there's water, there's life. Now here's something to just think about, common sense, to the person that's stuck in this religious dogma. When you look at the Bible and the Quran, and if we go to the Genesis story, the creation story from a monotheistic perspective can just be disseminated in a quick instant. Okay, those biblical stories, and now mainly the story of creation, only go back 6,000 years. Now we know it's a scientific fact. We know this planet has been here much longer than 6,000 years. We know the beginning of creation was not 6,000 years ago. Anybody that believes that's got to be completely stupid. So the bottom line is, what beginning and origin is that talking about in the book of Genesis, the so-called beginning? Now we know it's not the beginning, because when we read in the so-called Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 28, God says to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. The word there that is being used is to replenish. The Hebrew word is mole, which means to refill. Go look it up. If you refill something or replenish it, what is that confirmation of? It's if your glass is empty and it's to be refilled. That means there was something there already that you're now just replenishing it or refilling it. Again, if we pay close attention to the wording and you don't see it, if you just look at it in the English, or if you just take for word verbatim what the pastor is telling you, you can be tricked under the illusion that this pretty much is a system that doesn't sustain or hold itself up, because this definitely isn't the beginning. You can be confused in thinking this was the beginning. We see that this picks up from one of the many replenishing periods that took place on our Earth, one of the many meteorite showers that have hit our planet directly and destroyed it, and life has emerged. This is not the beginning. And again, we know the planet is 4.5 billion years old, not millions. 4.5 billion years old now, and I'll refer you to Dr. Delbert Blair's teaching on this subject that you need to go research. And he talks about how these draconian forces were the first, or these reptilian forces were the first beings on this planet. In the Sumerian doctrine, one of the names of this planet was called Tiamat. One of the names for Earth, Terrestrius. It also was another name for this planet. It was a water planet, because remember, factor in the fact that this planet is almost 70% water. Whether you want to accept it or not, you're breathing in a water environment, living in a water planet, almost like you're living in an aquarium, and you are a direct link to these reptilian beings. We don't want to get into that now. We'll get into that in another post, but to show you the connection there. So this is not the beginning of creation mentioned in the Genesis story. Now, the European races, this is their beginning. That's why they always refer to it in European or Euro-Christianity as the beginning. And it's not the beginning, because again, archaeological findings will show you, even if you want to refer to a recent discovery in the last 100 years of the being that they call Lucy in Ethiopia, whose discovery through carbon and fossil dating goes back over 1 billion years ago. So that's confirmation that life existed pre-Bible, or pre-biblical stories that they're so-called telling you was the beginning. Now, this is important only because of the fact this is what gets us out of that stupidity system of religion. Because when you accept the ignorance of religion, you just completely deny all the ancient cultures and civilizations that predate it. Egypt predates it. Samaria predates it. Many other cultures predate it, and again, when you tend to ignore that, you're actually disconnecting yourself from the reality of your spiritual consciousness. So this is not the beginning, and we have to get that and accept that in our mind, that our origin, our creation as beings, and our creation of the planet we lived on called Earth goes way beyond 6,000 years. Okay. I want to continue with one more excerpt from this book, Dark Light Consciousness, Melanin, Serpent Power, and the Matrix. Just to crack it, I'm just going through the introduction, just to kind of get that intuition going, just to get that positive spirituality, that linking yourself in to spiritual consciousness, because again, if we don't take it to the root, and I want to stress this again, every problem has its origin in the spiritual first. I don't care what anybody says, and this can be proven factually, even if it's a physical ailment in the body. Anything that surfaces on the external is confirmation that there's something wrong internally. And usually from a physical ailment or a sickness, there's a spiritual imbalancement, a disconnect from the etheric realm or the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And that's a reflection that manifests down physically. Now, these individuals or powers that be know if they work on you from the spiritual aspect of things, they can control you physically. And that's why I keep saying you have to take it back to the metaphysical. You can't avoid that. Okay? All right, so let's read this last page. We're going to finish with this. From the beginning, we must free our conception of evolution from the chains of purely earthbound life. Evolution is occurring on all planes of existence, not just here. From that tiny amoeba to the vast life of cosmogenesis. It extends fathoms below human consciousness and arches realms above and beyond it. Child development and neontology, along with NDA or near-death experience research, inform us that we are conscious for months before our physical birth and for an extended period after our physical death. During our existence within the life of the body and mind, as we know it, our consciousness is structured by these parameters. All the while, the great traditions confess that through the fields of post-mortem life, the principle of our development is animated by our psychic and spiritual aspiration, by our fears. And how many people are controlled by fears? How many people are pushed into doing things based on fear? And fear leads to ignorance, because when you don't know, you tend to do ignorant things. Okay? And by our desires. That's another thing. We talked about that. Controlling your emotions and your desires. And when we were talking about on an older class, the Emerald Tablets of Tahuti, making one self less dense, if you can't control your emotions, your ego, your lust, your desires, you will never make that spiritual transformation. Because again, back to these reptilians, draconian, Luciferian forces that feed off your emotions, they cater to the ego. The ego is the number one thing that they cater to control you. They know what your ego likes. They know what kind of music you want to hear that's going to cater to your ego. They know what type of fashion or clothing to throw at you to cater to your ego, to keep you in a certain mindset. It might sound trivial, but it's very important. Okay. The inner mind appears to be a quiet river until that curled up and shining portion of us meets the luminous, immaterial, and boundless, non-local light that oceanic intelligence, our genius, calls God. Spiritual discipline flows from this realization, and unshakable conviction flowers in this life. Do not confuse or limit existence and reality with its expressions in matter, space, and time. Reality, like matter itself, like matter itself, is ultimately transtemporal and transspatial. Even though the physical forces of nature may seem separate, they are truly unified in a higher dimensional space. Then I'm going to finish with this last sentence. Yes, both science and intuition acknowledge that we are embedded in a higher dimensional space. Our dense physical bodies and common objects of our everyday world occupy only 3 dimensions of height, breadth, and width. Okay? So again, to finish up with, the point of this post, we have to really tap into a deeper level of consciousness. Everything exists within the mind. The reality of the Creator exists within your mind. The infinite galaxies exist within your mind. Okay? The uninhibited realm of the Creator exists within the mental. You can't understand the Creator or God until you understand yourself and you go within. And you understand how everything in the universe is mental. Right? And we talked about that with the 7 principles of Tahuti. And the first doctrine is the doctrine of mentalism, that everything is mental. The mind is all. And until you understand that concept, you'll never be free of this ignorance called religion and all these dogmas that are accompanied and come along with it. Okay? You have to tap into that divine intelligence. Okay? We talked about something. And again, I want to refer to the good elder Dr. Delbert Blair, and when we were talking about the term Merkaba that he so elegantly broke down, the Ka and the Ba and Mer, or mirrors, movement of the spirit and the soul. One can transcend the physical realm while in this physical body by raising one's vibration and frequency, where they can be in one stationary place, but yet their body can be raised up to a Merkaba or a craft, and they can travel and transcend the universes and they travel to different galaxies. See, it's not really that complicated when you're looking at it from a metaphysical aspect. But when you're trying to correlate everything to the physical, you'll never see the reality of the truth. And that's the problem with most of these religions. It's an external journey. It's an outward journey in, but that's impossible. It's an inward journey out. You can't understand the Creator until you understand who and what you are as a walking, thinking, intelligent being on this planet. Okay? So, having said that, I think we are going to finish with that point there. We will pick up on another topic the next time, wherever the ancestors and the spirits and our guardians lead us to talk about. But again, we are living in extremely unique times. And like I said, those that are worried about all of this chaotic stuff that's going on in the world, and it's going on in the world, if you are affected and worried about it, then that means consciously you're not where you need to be. Because this stuff is only to affect and damage those that are not spiritually awake. Okay, I want to say that again. You have a disturbance within your soul if a lot of this stuff going on in the world, these cataclysmic events, these wars, and this violence and all this death and destruction, it's showing you that the soulless beings are trying to cause chaos, confusion, and war on the surface because they know their time is up and they have to leave. Okay? Now, if you are an individual, it's quite simple. If you have a soul, it doesn't affect you. It's that simple. It's nothing spooky. It's nothing mystical. You have to raise your higher self. Raise your spiritual consciousness to put up your psychic self-defense where none of that stuff can affect you. That stuff is geared towards the mentally weak, those that fall prey to that spiritual warfare. Okay? So it's very important to understand that. Okay? And in closing again, if you're watching this post as the day of this post, which is March 15th, 2015, don't forget to join us on Awakening Universal Minds this Thursday, March 19th, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to have Dr. Phil Valentine on, and we're going to be talking about Egypt, metaphysics, and a whole wide range of topics. So definitely tune in. Again, you can go to talkshoe.com. You can go right to the top of the page, the home page, and on talkshoe.com and type in Awakening Universal Minds, and the show will come right up with the call-in information, the access code. You can call in and participate on the show. You can listen online, participate in the chat. You can do both simultaneously, whatever you choose to do. Again, that's on talkshoe.com, Awakening Universal Minds, and that's going to be this Thursday, March 19th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dr. Phil Valentine will be on the show. The following Thursday, on March 26th, we're going to have this good brother who I was taking some excerpts out of his book today, Dark Light Consciousness, Melanin and Serpent Power in the Matrix, Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum, who's wrote several books. We're going to focus on this book. It's a phenomenal book. I definitely recommend you get this book if you're really looking for information to take you to the next metaphysical level. This book is powerful. You really got to sit there and absorb the information in this book because it gets into a whole nother level. I also definitely recommend that you go to Dr. Delbert Blair's website, the Meta Center, the number 2.com. So when you type it in, it's the Meta Center, the number 2. Don't type in the number 2. Actually, put in the actual number 2.com and definitely go to Dr. Delbert Blair's website. Check out his products. Look at all his lectures and all the classes that he's done. And he's probably one of the most phenomenal elders out there right now that's been out for a long, long time, talking about every topic above and beyond the sun. So I definitely give you those recommendations. If you also go to our radio show, you can listen to all the archives on TalkShoe.com, every show that we have done. And we make a lot of reference and recommendations for different information and sources you can look up and go research, because we want to take you to the sources so you can do the research for yourself. And that's the methodology I use to teach. You're never going to come to the reality of it if you don't put the work in yourself. So I'm not telling you to believe anything I say. I'm telling you need to go do the work and raise yourself up to the reality and the realization of what's going on spiritually, mentally, and consciously. Okay? And again, just to remind you, you can go to Mother Nubia Incorporated's Google page, and all the radio shows are on that page archived. Okay, so having said that, appreciate everybody tuning in, those that have been subscribing and watching these classes, and until next time, and wherever the ancestors guide us to talk about, that's what we'll do. So this is your brother Beniti Amun Ray saying Hotep, and we will see you next time.